Have you ever wondered why it's called a comedy special? Like, why is an hour of comedy called a comedy special? And really, there's no simple answer, but it kind of dates back to the origin of stand-up comedy, where people used to digest comedy in 10, 5-minute slots in nightclubs, and sometimes 20 if you're really good. So eventually, it became special to have a longer period of comedy of an hour that would get broadcast to an entire country over the radio or over the TV. It feels weird because I'm going to be talking about Jimmy Carr in this episode, someone who I've done a podcast with, someone who gave me an hour of his time 3 years ago. Now in the world that we have now that's saturated with comedy, you can get hours of comedy all day if you wanted to, on Netflix, on Prime, on HBO, even on Instagram now with clips and all the videos that you see on YouTube. So the reason why you've probably stopped watching comedy specials is because a lot of the stuff that you're watching has kind of just blended into the background. Because I'm a stand-up comedian, I've been doing comedy for about 4 years. I'm not an expert or anything, but I feel like I have a couple things to say on this. And an hour of comedy is hard. It's difficult. It takes people years and years and years to get to the point where they can do it. And in this video, I'm kind of going to be arguing for a world where fewer people are getting hours of comedy, but it kind of feels conflicting because as a comedian myself, I'm someone who hopes to someday have a special that's on a streaming service, and to be in that position and also be saying maybe a few too many people are getting comedy specials kind of feels a bit uncomfortable. But look, we're in the situation now where there's so many people who are releasing hours and hours of comedy that now it becomes kind of meaningless to even have a special. Like, that in and of itself used to be a big achievement. To have an hour worth of comedy that was worth broadcasting to the entire world or the entire country. But I guess in some level, it does show the fact that the quality of comedy is lifting generally. So there are definitely more world-class comedians who deserve to have an hour. But still, man, we're now in this position where there's so many people who have so much comedy out there that the landscape of comedy has just completely changed forever. I'll give you some inside knowledge. As a comedian in the UK, there's kind of a couple camps of comedy that people tend to fall into broadly. A lot of the time, people can either become, let's say, woke comedians, to use a term that I hate to use, or they can be free speech comedy bros. Those are the two broad camps. And what ends up happening is that kind of manifests in the comedy special world. Because you have a situation where you have big comedians like Jimmy Carr and Ricky Gervais, who are basically just making comedy specials that are just another entry into this argument between the two camps. Because you have them just basically answering all their haters in their specials by actually saying stuff like, these jokes are going to be too edgy, so try not to get me cancelled. And it's just like that camp that essentially looks at the other camp of woke comedians and says, I want comedy to just be about the comedy, you should be able to say anything, whatever. It's like they seem like they're the most obsessed about the politics of everything and what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. And it's like when you're saying in your actual special that you don't want to be cancelled, it's kind of like, come on. The actual art form itself and the actual body of text should stand by itself without actually including the outside world's BS. Jimmy's special, he literally says this phrase: my pronouns are he, because I identify as a comedian. Like, come on, man. Come on. This topic of pronouns and transgender, whatever you think about the topic, like, I am definitely very pro, and I don't care what anyone does with their own life. But it's just dominated comedy for so long, and it's kind of broken people's brains. Like Dave Chappelle, the comedian that got me into comedy, who influenced me so much and who I owe so much to, his kind of all of his specials after a certain point just become dominated by this topic, just about transgender people, about non-binary, all this stuff. And it just becomes like, wow, can we just talk about something else? Like, why is this thing taken over so much? But part of me understands why it has taken over so much, because all the media and all the tweets that they get are all focusing on this one thing, because people are outraged at a lot of the stuff that they say, rightly or wrongly so. So it means that that kind of influences their minds, thinking like, this is now the most important thing in the world, it's the only thing to ever talk about. But that means that all these specials end up being basically the same. They either end up being people standing up for discriminated against communities, or becomes people saying, oh no, I'm a free speech person, so I can say whatever I want. And I'm just trying to take a step back and say, can we just have people who focus on trying to be funny and not trying to make a political statement one way or the other? And it actually kind of annoys me with the free speech people, because they actually criticize the woke people for saying, oh, you are someone who actually puts politics into comedy too much. Comedy should just stand on its own. But it feels like those people who are on the like free speech side seem to care more about the what you should say and what you shouldn't say, like more than the woke people, because it's like that's all they talk about. It's actually in their specials. They describe themselves as edgy in their own specials. Like they talk about how they'll be cancelled in their own specials. These millionaire comedians on Netflix will talk about how they're going to be cancelled. Even Jimmy on This Morning joked about it, saying like, I've been cancelled multiple times, but he's on This Morning.
I've been cancelled many times. I'm on This Morning. Yeah. It's like, it's not a real thing. It's like, and there's a big difference between criticism. Some people legitimately think I'm rubbish. And some people just kind of go, well, he must be banned. We can't have him playing theatres anymore. That's a different thing. Do you remember? Yeah.
And I think they kind of know it's not real. I like to take people at their word, so I don't want to assume any ill intent in what they do. But it gets to this kind of point where it's like it becomes kind of cynical with marketing strategy, because it's now in this world where, because it's so oversaturated with stand-up, because there's so many specials, you now have to essentially stand out somehow, even if you're a world-class comedian. And the way that people stand out is getting people outraged, because essentially your clip will go viral, people will be angry, they won't buy tickets, but they'll share it to people who will love it and will kind of watch it sometimes out of spite. So either way, it increases your viewership and it makes you sell more tickets. Like Ricky Gervais had this one joke where he spoke about Nietzsche and Hitler having a conversation, and how Hitler had completely misinterpreted what Nietzsche had said, and how it was just a ridiculous miscommunication. And that was such a beautiful joke that he wrote like years and years and years and years ago. Now all he talks about is just the same topic of transgender people who are just trying to live their lives, and non-binary people who are just trying to live their lives. And it's just like, man, the world is so messed up, and there are so many crazy things happening now that you could talk about, but this is the only thing that you think is interesting to anyone. Don't get me wrong, they're part of both Jimmy and Ricky Gervais' specials that I love. At the end of Jimmy's most recent special, Natural Born Killer, where he's talking to the 9-year-old kid in the audience about consent, is so funny in the way he manages to like dance around such a complex issue, and actually makes it kind of educational in a way. That's really cool, and I think that's really great writing from him, because he mixes the joke structure with the like audience participation, the crowd work. I think it's great. I probably would be so happy if I could even be half the comedian that these people are. So it's not me saying that I could do better or that they should do better. It's just me saying that the system of comedy that we're in now just rewards this marketing structure where you go for outrage. And also that means that a lot of the content itself suffers, because no one is incentivized to talk about anything new, because the things that outrage people are very specific things that haven't changed and might not change for a very long time. Honestly, ultimately, it's a shame, because I was a fan of comedy before I was a doer of comedy. And comedy is my favorite art form. I love everything about it. I love performing it. I love listening to it. Like, I used to intake so much comedy before I even picked up a microphone. But I just worry about where we are now, because who cares about who's releasing a special? Someone releases a special on Netflix, it kind of means nothing now, because ultimately, it's not special anymore. It's just about selling tickets for your next tour, maybe causing some outrage if you're Ricky or Jimmy or whatever, and then boosting your career up a little bit more. But ultimately, I kind of want to go back to a world where there's fewer people releasing specials. And ultimately, my theory is more and more people will actually go into their little camps of fandoms, because I think that's ultimately where this outrage comes from. The reason why people get so outraged is because if you're a fan of Jimmy Carr, you know what he is. If you're a fan of Rishi Sunak, I don't know where that came from. If you're a fan of Ricky Gervais, you know what he is. But sometimes their clips and their content will escape their fandoms, and people will react to it who aren't in the fandom. So then you get this outrage and this cancel culture. But I think someday we'll just get to a point where people only like the comedians that they like, and they're not really going to pay attention to anyone else, because we'll get more and more divided into our little bubbles. just for the record, I do think cancel culture is a problem, but I think it's a problem for people who don't have these platforms where they complain about it. People who say things that might be unforgivable, but they don't deserve to have their lives ruined for it. And I think that is genuinely a problem. Probably less so now that we're more aware of it, but I think it is a problem because people shouldn't lose their jobs for something that they said 10 years ago, especially people who don't have the power or the influence to do anything about it. Man, this art form is in such an interesting place, and I'm so glad to be doing stand-up now. And my conversation with Jimmy has taken on such a new light since his career has moved on forward post-COVID, because I feel like he's exploded so much. So if you want to hear me talk to Jimmy Carr, watch this video here that I did about it. If you want to hear my conversation with James Acaster, watch this video as well. If you want to watch my stand-up, subscribe, like, do all the cool stuff. But if not, I'll see you guys later. Peace.